You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And as usual, we're your hosts for this show. And of course, we're reviewing yet another episode of Skeleton Crew, fully understanding that episode 7 actually drops tomorrow. We're, of course, usually I think the last ones to basically review this thing. But that's good because that means you can take in all the other reviews and then process them, and then you can come for the real one, which is ours, of course. So,
Right.
a couple of interesting things about this episode. It's actually the second shortest at 34 minutes, which I thought was interesting because I started to get somewhat used to the longer episodes. And even though, I mean, they're all right around, 30 to 40 minutes or whatever, I thought that being that this is the second shortest, the other thing that happens a lot in Skeleton Crew, it seems, is that they actually get the title from a line of dialogue in the episode, which I also thought was interesting. And to that end, it's also probably the shortest episode title, where it's just called Zero Friends Again. Usually these things are, practically like a paragraph as far as the titles go. And then, of course, this one is notable because it was actually directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, which Ted chimes in right away and says, best, I think he means best one yet for me. Bryce Dallas Howard could direct it all going forward for me. I'm a fan. So Ted weighs in as usual right away. Hopefully, Ted, you can actually stay up and participate in the rest of the show. I know sometimes you have to bail out, but yeah, I mean, I thought that, again, we're talking overall stuff here. Another winner for me. You could definitely tell that this is done by Bryce Dallas Howard, and yeah, there's a lot to get into with this one, which I'm sure we will in a few minutes. So what were your thoughts on this one?
I thought this was more of a filler episode. I not to say that it didn't give you anything, because it definitely did some character development, but I don't think it progressed the story overall further. So that was my only, I guess, criticism of this episode. I thought it was cool though. Some things were a little cheesy, but then again, once again, it's a kid show, so like the whole crab robot thing, it's just kind of like, okay.
I kind of like those, the little trash crabs.
Yeah. It's kind of,
and of course,
okay.
they basically,
but they're droids too. But it's like, okay, like,
yeah. I mean, I would agree that this probably had the most, I don't know, kiddie-like element maybe to the series so far. But I think a lot of that was because this is more of a character development show. This episode was definitely more, let's get into some character development. We're going to pause the story a little. I mean, I thought that there was enough there to hold your attention, at least as far as story development goes. But I could see if you're going to say, hey, maybe this one was more of a filler episode. I don't know if I 100% agree, but I could definitely see that point of view, because it does seem to take a little bit of a pause in favor of character development. And I think that that's what was really going on, because that's why I chose this thumbnail. This is really more of a KB-centric episode, I think, in addressing some things too with Fern, as far as her being this just unwavering leader and pretty much just, universalizing basically everything with her. It's kind of like, you should be able to do things because I can do them, or whatever the case may be. And of course, KB's struggle with just keeping up with her. And we also get a little bit of backstory into her as far as, she's basically cybernetic. She had an accident. Because remember, we were actually wondering in the beginning, is like, okay, is she an android? Is she human? And she just has some, things, but it's almost, and I remember you and I both compared her to Lobot from the beginning, and I think that that's probably an accurate description in the sense of she had this accident, so she had some cybernetic implants or whatever that basically enhance her, and that's, I mean, but she is human. She's not like a droid or anything. So yeah, I mean, and I think that the rift that was developed between KB and Fern really gave us a lot of character development and a lot of interesting, like, detailed storyline, right? That obviously, yes, you are sacrificing the pace that we had in the previous episodes where we were moving the story along. Here we're definitely taking a little bit of a pause, right? Because it basically does pick
Hmm.
up where the last episode left off, but now we're getting a little bit of character development. And I guess the question that we almost have to ask, like you said, it's not really a criticism, but it's an observation. Do you really have to sacrifice moving the story along to do character development? I guess that's a good question that could be up for discussion tonight.
Well, yeah, I think you can. I just feel like if you're going to do that, you need to extend the amount of episodes. So instead of 10, maybe we get 12.
Yeah.
You know,
Or 8. I think this thing's like 8 episodes. I mean, we only got 2
yeah,
more episodes after this now. There's like the one that
and
drops
that's what I
tomorrow
mean.
and then the season finale.
Yeah, and that's my point, and that's where I feel like if you want to, I don't mind character development at all. I love it. I just feel like okay, but give it enough time for us to get through that and the story. So in this particular episode, and I agree with you that we saw the rift between Fern and KB, and then, but I also enjoyed. I thought this was masterfully done. The way that they actually told the story, where you have almost opposites of each other with on their separate quests, even though they're used to having those type of opposites with each other,
Mhm.
they're just able to communicate it better to the other person. And I hope I'm not confusing anybody when I say that. So, this is what I mean. So we eventually have Fern, like she runs off. They decide like, okay, they're gonna go their own separate ways. And Fern leaves with Neil, who we all know, like, is a kind of a wuss. He's kind of a crybaby. He's like, look, I'm not all about, the adventure. I just want to, get me back home so I can just be with my sisters and just go to school. And you have Wim, who's a little bit, he's all about the adventure. KB is more like, okay, it's cool. But KB found the fact that she could talk to Wim about her issues with Fern. And we see that Neil was able to communicate to Fern about, like, look, I can't do what you do. I
Mhm.
don't have your leg. I don't have long spider leg. I mean, that was hilarious to me. I don't have long spider legs. Like my feet get stuck in this thing. Like, look, I can't I can't do the thing that you can do. So I'm sorry, but hey, it is what it is. And Fern had to realize that, like, oh, you know what? He's right. So let me try to help him out because, okay, yeah, he can't. So she gets the rope and everything, and I thought that was really cool. And then I thought even watching Wim try to help KB with her cybernetics, just doing that, being able to, hey, pause the adventure side of you and just, tune in to a person and be able to um be there for someone. And he was able to be a hero without being a Jedi, even though she called him that, which I thought that was cute. She called him young
Yeah, that
Jedi. I
was
thought
that
that
was
was
cool. Well, and it's true. There was a lot of introspective things, right? I mean, there was KB now rising above just being Fern's sidekick, and of course Neil being, his usual funny, adorable self, but then pointing out to Fern, because I think that that's something that both Neil and KB have in common, where Fern more or
Mhm.
less just sees them not as individual people, but kind of extensions of herself, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and just, okay, this is what we're going to do. And she's not really thinking of any limitations they might have. KB, of course, is pointing out how she's struggling to keep up with her and not to feel different. And I mean, I think that that's cool too, because again, this is allowing these different type of characters to appeal to different people, right? Because obviously the KB character appeals to kids who have disabilities or things like
Mhm.
that, but yet they don't beat you over the head with it.
Mhm.
And I think that that was something that was really cool in the sense of that they actually explored a little bit of the dynamic between a lot of these characters, not just as a group,
Mhm.
but as individuals. And of course, on the flip side of that, you had the whole Jod thing, which, his arrest was hilarious. Um, there's a lot of humor. The music, of course, is well placed. Um, and then of course that whole speech that Jod gave, his whole appeal, I thought that was
Mhm.
masterfully done too. So you really have two different stories going on because again, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this episode was instead of Jod being with the kids, now you had these parallel storylines going on. Not unlike a couple episodes ago where the kids were basically with that warrior plan or whatever. And then Jod, of
Yeah.
course, is trying to, figure out where they were and deal with his own thing. You have a parallel thing happening here, but this time, Jod was seen as a threat because remember, he had a knife basically to Fern's throat last time. So they were actually escaping
Mhm.
from him. So it's going to be interesting to see again where they converge. But there was a lot of different elements I thought too. I mean, just so much, right? I mean, on the Jod side of it, you had the Brutus character who I thought was really again threatening. I like the fact that they're not shying away from having darker, more sinister themes in this show. You have little things like you know, little pirate things, right? So instead of like the hourglass, it's like a plasma hourglass. They have, things like
Mhm.
that. I just thought were a really nice touch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was cool. I loved his, um, like the whole tribunal thing. It's kind of had a Pirates of the Caribbean, you
Yes.
know, over to like the whole parlay type thing. Like,
That's
well,
I
we
know I
have to
kept
give him a
expecting
chance.
him to say
Mm.
that.
It's kind of like, all right, like we have to give him a chance to defend himself. I mean, it's probably no point, but we kind of have to do it. And then he kind of like said, are you I'm hungry. Are you hungry? And he's delivering, he's appealing to something that they all can, relate to.
Yeah, just that whole
Um,
appeal was just so well written, I thought, because again, it was like an entire speech, right? I mean, it wasn't just
mhm.
a little scene. I mean, it was a pivotal moment, and I thought that that was just a really cool surprise, and there was a lot of depth in that scene. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then going back to the kids, um, I did think that was a nice way of showcasing, like or explaining like that look, kids with disabilities, like, hey, I can't do everything that you do, and it's harder for me to keep up with you. And but like you said, it was done in a way where like you didn't feel like you were beat over the head with it. And then but it showed you just like the compassion that you want kids to show those type of kids. Like, hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? Like, well, I need help doing this, and well, I don't know how to do that. Well, just walk me through it. And, he's pulling out, when the back of her head popped out, I was like, whoa, I
Yeah,
wasn't
I mean, there was a
expecting that.
lot, and
That was kind
again,
of
it was, and I honestly thought that it was nice that we got a little bit more explanation on what KB's situation really is. Because that
hmm
wasn't 100% clear. I mean, I spent the entire series so far wondering, like, okay, is she in like a straight up android? Like Data?
right.
There's our Star Trek
Yep.
reference. Is she kind of like Lobot, where she has like some cybernetic things going on, but I mean, it really wasn't very clear. And the fact that they went so in depth and we're going into, hey, this is how, it works. And in a way, her walking Wim through the whole thing was walking us through it as well.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I thought that was a really nice way of giving some exposition without, like a crawl or some sort of text, or, you have some character
Hmm.
just like explaining it to where it's like, all right, I know what we're doing now. And I mean,
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool. And now, of course, Ted chimes in. He says, for me, it hit on all cylinders: action, adventure, humor, but also dead serious as well. Very suspenseful episode for me. Lots of heart and endurance by the kids, and some mighty smooth pirate talking. And then, of course, he
Hmm.
caps that off. Let me get this in here real quick. He says, also love when pirates sing, too. Yeah, that was another thing that was interesting, was that little song that Judd
Song.
started singing, and then
Everybody kind of joined in on the chord,
yeah, and there wasn't he? Didn't he say something like, "Hey, how's the last part go?" or something like that? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
and I thought that
Yeah,
was
I
an
mean,
interesting thing too. That was really different.
well, yeah, I mean, the thing about this episode and um was just, how they kind of came to their own, they're growing up in some ways. And this whole experience is making them grow up in ways that they probably didn't expect to grow. And that's what I love about it. It's almost kind of like watching Ahsoka when she was first brought on. And she's like, Sky Guy this, but then you're watching her mature as she gets put into these situations. She's realizing like, oh, I can't just run in here and just do this. I have to be a little bit more careful. I have to think about, okay, this could affect other people. And watching Fern having to do that with Neil, like, okay, I realized that, like, yeah, he doesn't have my legs. He doesn't have, like, he's not even human. So, like, I have to make some sort of allowance for him and help him along because, he's a part of the team now. And then to see them, like, okay, now they kind of commandeer, or they kind of hop on this, since we're talking about pirates, I have to use nautical terms, but but now they're commandeering, like they're trying to commandeer their ship back. They're on one of the little things that's transporting their ship to like this wreck yard, this junkyard, where they're about to get eaten by this massive whatever the heck this thing is. It's like a
It's like a giant trash crab. I mean, you
trash
had
com
the little
yeah.
ones, and then you had the big ones. And I mean, one of the things that I thought was
But then you have
really,
to I'm talking about the one with the flames in on the inside of it. That was the other one.
oh yeah,
Unless that's a crab too. I mean, that could be that as well. But
I mean, it was really tough to say because you had a lot of these different creatures popping up, which is another thing I really think is cool about this show, is that they're giving us things that are a little bit different. Things that aren't necessarily the typical Star Wars things that we always get. They're putting a little bit of spins on it. I mean, one of my favorite parts of this whole thing, honestly, was the fact that Wim, in his innocence, was listening to the trash crabs, going follow, follow, or whatever, thinking that, hey, we're going to lead you to, help. When really,
mhm.
it's like, no, we're leading you to be food for this much bigger version of the creature. And it's like, he's
Exactly.
he's starting to learn, like, look, not everybody or every creature or whatever has good intent. That
Yeah.
they're not always trying to
Exactly.
help you. You have to be a little bit more discerning about what you do and who you listen to. And then, of course, by the same token, you had the same thing with Fern, like you alluded to with Neil. She has to stop thinking that everybody is just an extension of her, and that she's
Yeah.
also learning that maybe she doesn't have all the answers. And of course, that's a continuation of the last episode. But there was just like a lot of, like you said a little earlier, there's a lot of really good growth moments that I think are going to prove to be pivotal to the next few episodes. Because I've always said, even though they do release these things weekly, so we get one episode at a time, sometimes I almost wonder if it's unfair to just single out each episode and review it. I mean, certainly it invites itself, especially because they're releasing it that way. So you
Mhm.
do, in some ways, have to say, look, we have to take every episode on its own merit. But we also have to understand that each one of these Star Wars shows really is like a big movie, right? It's like a, how many ever episodes. So if they average 8 and they're like 40 minutes long or whatever, it's probably like a 6-hour movie. And
Mhm.
sometimes, and I confess I haven't really done this yet myself, but I almost think it would be better after we do these reviews to in some ways go back, binge the entire series once all the episodes are released, and then see, okay, does this actually work a little bit better? Or, is the intent a little bit more when you see it in a complete project versus
Yeah.
isolating each of these episodes? But I will say, you know, one of the things that Skeleton Crew has done successfully is even though they are releasing one episode at a time, it holds up. And of course, the humor's there. And like you had once said, and I think a previous review, well, both of us really said it, but I mean, I forgot what it was that you actually said in regards to some of the characters, where it's the way that kids would actually speak, right? And one
Mhm.
of my favorite lines in this one is when Wim was like, I'm always wrong about who's the good guy or something to that
Oh
effect.
yeah.
I thought
Exactly.
that was just the perfect. Every episode always has that one line that perfectly
Yeah.
encapsulates the mood of the episode, and I think that was the big one there.
Yeah, and like you said, the thing with the kids is we're watching them grow up and develop, and this is the big thing is that they're understanding that the world is not as cookie cutter as they may have thought it to be, right?
Right? Yeah.
So,
That big
Wim
adventure or
is
whatever.
always, yeah, Wim is always, like, oh well, he's that wide-eyed, naive, um, well, everyone should be helping us, right? I mean, why wouldn't they? And this is like,
Exactly.
dude, like there's terrible people out here and who they don't care. But why? He's that type of kid. And then you have Fern, who's like the pessimist, who's kind of like she's challenging everything. And sometimes to the point where it's like you don't even realize that you're kind of isolating yourself away from everybody because everyone's just like your attitude is kind of aggressive. And then you have Neo who's realizing like, okay, yeah, I'm a wuss, but I mean, I need to be, I kind of need to man up a little bit sometimes. Like when we saw him in Akron when he stood up to when Smeed decided to go haywire. He was just like, "Hey, get away from me!" And you're just like, "Neil, really?"
Well,
So
I
we're
think
seeing
we are,
we're
but I
seeing
think
those moments,
but part of that too is I think that Neil's also seeing that he can do some of these things. Because remember, one of the big things is
right?
that he's always talking about, oh, I can't do this. I couldn't possibly. And he's starting to see, like, hey, if I actually attempt this stuff,
Apply myself.
yeah, it's like, wow, I really can do that, And I mean, I think that a lot of people, man, my own mom, I go through that too, where it's kind of like, thinking,
Yeah.
oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. And it's like, well, if you actually just try, it's like, whoa. And then that look of wonder almost when they realize they can accomplish things that they didn't think possible. That's where the real growth happens. And I think that that's where Neil's
Hmm.
journey is at right now.
Yeah. And then you have, KB who's, you know, quiet for the most part, but at the same time, she's starting to I think she's starting to find her voice. And the fact that she, when she was talking to when they were on the ship and they were trying to figure out the whole like should they push the button as far as the whole like you saw Fern, she was like, okay, hey, I don't know if I should do this. But just watching them, how they started to like, everybody kind of fell into their role. Like, okay, Wim was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna try to shoot our way off this thing. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go be useful here. Neil's like, well, they told Neil to go fly it, and he's like, well, I don't know. Listen, you watched him do it before. Just do that. And KP, she's standing up and telling Fern what I mean, and she's like, I got this. She found her voice, and I think that's what we got out of this episode was, everybody's kind of finding themselves a little bit more and discovering,
Yeah.
who they are,
And what their
and
role is in the group
and what their
dynamic.
role
Yeah.
is exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that's was masterfully done by Bryce Dallas Howard, without losing any of the things that had already been established, which is also a great thing.
Well, that's why I agree with Ted. I mean, I've long said, Bryce Dallas Howard she gets the credit a lot of times that she deserves, but she's not in the conversation as much as she should be, I don't think. I think that,
I agree. I agree.
everybody yaps about Dave Filoni and how it's like, no, Filoni is not ready yet. Let's be honest. Bryce Dallas Howard is the one who should actually be taking the reins, at least as far as directing goes. Maybe sure, you get Filoni to write it, kind of guide the overall direction or whatever. But as far as actually making the films, making anything going forward, I would be 100% comfortable if Bryce Dallas Howard was the one that just took it on, pretty much for everything.
Yeah.
And this episode proves it because there's a lot of different dynamics. I mean, for one thing, one of the things that I think that she brings to the table here, and again, I mean, I get it, there's the writing and all that too. I'm not dismissing that completely, but the fact that KB has been mostly relegated to being a somewhat silent side character. She's been basically a sidekick, comes in kind of like how Tech used to, right? Where when her particular skill set comes into play, obviously from a writer's perspective, oh, we'll just give this to KB or whatever. But this is the first episode where we actually learn a little bit about her and see a little bit of expansion on her character. And I think that that's something that cannot be underestimated. I think that, when you look at things like this is the first time we ever see really a third dimension to her character. I mean, it's not that she was a bad character, it was just rather two-dimensional. But now I think we're seeing something that we haven't seen before and that can build on. And I do wonder sometimes because again, we haven't seen these last two episodes that are coming up, and they are coming up, that this is probably a bridge. And that's why I don't necessarily think it's a filler episode. I think if anything, it was more like, okay, let's slow down. Let's build these characters and really fill them in a little, because we're going to need some of this now moving into the last two episodes of this season. So we'll have to see if that's the case.
Yeah, you brought up a interesting comparison that I didn't think about, and that's comparing them to the Bad Batch, because that's exactly kind of how they are.
They really are.
in a
I mean,
way.
they're kind of like a fledgling. Obviously the Bad Batch
Like,
had been
yeah,
together for a while, but
right. So they are kind of knew the roles or whatnot. But like,
right.
if you're kind of looking at them, you can kind of see that
They're a kitty.
KB was like a kitty version.
The junior batch.
Or the junior brigade. Yeah, the junior brigade of the Bad Batch. Or
the
something
young
like
batch
that.
or something. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just different because again, I mean, and this thing had a lot of fun elements to it. I mean, there was a lot of pulse pounding moments, with the crabs and all that. And then of course, when they escaped with the ship. And again, I mean, I like the fact that not just she, but they all had a little bit of trouble, because you pointed out brilliantly that yes, this is where they started to really embrace their roles and take them on for the first time. But, it wasn't 100% successful, right? It wasn't like they just suddenly knew how to fly the ship perfectly and all this other stuff. I mean, I like that. And it was a grounded moment, but yet it did have that same reckless abandon and that exhilaration that you get from a lot of Star Wars stuff. And I just think that was
Yeah, it was a
Amazing.
do or die moment for them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
essentially what happened. It was just one of those like, okay, like, look, if we hit this, like, look, and that's the thing I loved about it. It was kind of like that moment where, and I think this is probably what happened in her head, because she just kept going back and forth and debating with herself whether she should hit this button or not.
Yeah, that was a big
And it's
moment.
like, look, and it's like, she probably had to think to herself, if I hit the button and we blow up, we die. If I do nothing, we're gonna die anyway. So at least let me try it. At least we might get out of it. But I know if I don't hit it, we're definitely gonna die. So, and the fact that it actually then the shit looks kind of cool without that extra stuff on it.
Yeah,
It
that
kind of
was
reminds me of
well,
the. It kind of reminds me of the boot thing. It also kind of reminds me of the whole Batman Returns when he hit the button and then it kind of turns into the little missile to go
yep.
through the
Yep.
little.
Well, no, that's a good point too, because that whole and I had briefly forgotten about that. Yeah, where that thing was just basically like munching up the ship, and there was a certain point where you're like, all right, man. I mean, really, if you think about it, there that thing almost shouldn't have been able to. I mean, other than it separating itself, it was
Yeah,
already past the point of no return. I mean, they were
yeah,
debating, like pushing, well, should I do it? Should I do it? That thing had enough of that ship at that point that it's like, okay, man,
yeah.
it's you're done. It's a point of no return. But then when it basically backed out and it had separated itself from the rest of the hull or whatever it was, yeah, you're like, okay, a little bit of a stretch of reality maybe, but you could
It's
still
kind of
hang
like
on to it.
it was like a Star Trek moment with the saucer section. Like,
Yeah,
all
that's
right,
exactly. Then
that's
that's
the
honestly, that's basically what it reminded me of. Ted says the little bad batch, 100%. Yeah, I mean, they really
right,
are mirroring that same camaraderie, that same dynamic, the same, each one
which is fine
has
with
their
me
role.
because the Bad Batch is a successful show, so I'm fine with that.
Well, and again, I mean, if nothing else, like I said after the last episode, all of my fear were really with episode 4. Because usually it's episode 3. By episode 3, that's where you know whether or not a Star Wars show is going to drop the ball or not. And clearly it didn't.
Mm.
And then we got another couple of just really amazing episodes. So after the last episode, it was no longer a question of, hey, is the show going to continue on the same quality? I mean, we only have, like including tonight's, well, not tonight per
Tomorrow,
se, but including this past episode, the one that we're reviewing right now, 6. We have 6,
mm.
7, and 8. So we have 3 episodes. We're reviewing 6. Obviously, tomorrow episode 7 drops, and then a week from tomorrow episode 8 drops. So we're getting to the end of this thing. But I think that we can safely say, look, it's a good quality show. Now, it is going to be interesting to see where it goes from here, because the one thing that you could do if you're a skeptic and you want to hang on to a little bit of negativity, you have plenty of opportunity, because there have been times where shows, particularly, I think, it might have been the Book of Boba Fett, where even though it had problems like throughout the show, but there's been some where it's like, okay, they can redeem it with the season finale, but sometimes they have a show that's really, really good, and then it just drops the ball in the season finale. And that's always the saddest moment. I don't think
Hmm.
that's going to happen with this, but you can hang on to that hope if you're a skeptical, negative type of a toxic fan. But that said, I honestly think it's going to be cool, but I also think it's going to be interesting to see where they go, because this is something that you and I talked about um, toward the beginning when we started reviewing this series. And that is, are they going to complete a story and wrap it up for this season, and then, of course, maybe next season do a new one? Or are they just going to wrap up this section of the story and then continue it on in season 2? I mean, there's like a lot of speculation right now among fans about how are they going to handle this, because, and then of course there's a question that you and I ask every show, because people say, well, how is it? Do you like it? Whatever. And it's like, well, we really don't know how many seasons they intend to go. If this is going to
Mhm.
be like a 2 or 3 season show, you can judge it differently than if it's going to be like a 5 or 6 season show.
Yeah. Um, I think this is gonna be this is a complete um 180 from the Acolyte.
Oh
So I
yeah.
think it's widely
Yeah.
successful in that regard. I think that there's going to be more. I think there's a whole lot more story to tell, and I think we can follow this group of kids. I mean, I would actually love to watch these guys like grow up more. Like
I know, kind of like Ahsoka.
so. Yeah, like I would really love to see them, like because right now they're probably eh, maybe fifth or sixth grade or something like that. I probably would say if I had to give a rough estimate, but maybe even seventh. But I would love to see these kids like in high school. Like I would love to see them almost get up to like almost 17, 18 years old. They're out, okay, doing their thing now and really trying to find their place in the universe yet again. You know,
Well,
so I
through each stage, and then of course they can also
yeah,
tell different stories through this because again,
absolutely.
it cannot be ignored that they're coming out with a lot of lore in this too. You're getting okay. This is one of the jewels of the old Republic type planets. It was an old Republic mint.
Hmm.
I mean, there's like a wealth of
Hmm.
things they could do.
No pun intended.
Oh yeah, right. They can actually do some things like maybe they set up the James Mangold movie because that's supposed to be like at the very beginning of the
Hmm.
Jedi and talking about how that came into existence, they could start to tie in some lore. David joins us. He says, "Hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day. Every day is Star Wars Day for us, for the most part, anyway." So, yeah, I mean, I just think that if they want to go multiple seasons and then follow them on through, because it would be interesting in a live action setting to follow really young characters. I mean, just take Wim, for example. Now, we don't know what's going to happen
Hmm.
to him, when he's like 20 years old or whatever. But just for the sake of an example, it would be interesting to see what would happen if he starts out now and maybe he does pursue the path of a Jedi. By the time he's 20, 21, he becomes a full fledged Jedi. We have seen that progression.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think it would just be really fascinating because you get a little bit of that with Ahsoka. You get a little bit of that with Omega on the Bad Batch,
Yeah.
where
Yep.
we saw her. It's a little bit less of a stretch from Ahsoka because Ahsoka, we saw when she was like very young, all the way to when she was basically like in her 30s or something. But you still get to see that growth and pretty much the development of the character. You can cram in a bunch of lore. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do if you want to do that. Now, the question becomes, of course, do you keep Jude Law's character in there? Do you keep the Jod character in there? Do you maybe bring in somebody else that fills his role, like it's a completely different thing? I mean, there's like a different ways that you can go with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could keep him to a certain point, and then you might have to move on beyond him. But then, you got so many other characters like Kim, the owl. You know,
Yeah, or
you can
like
always go back to
Pocket, that
her.
that bounty
Pocket.
hunter. There that's true. But I would actually argue that Jod is an interesting enough character, considering this guy gets a new name every episode. Um,
Right.
there's probably a lot there that you could explore too. Plus, it's Jude Law. I mean, to
Yeah.
have him as part of Star Wars is just I mean, that's like a really great thing,
And
I think.
so, what do you think we're gonna see next
Well,
episode?
let's see. The next, well, and again, it's what we like to see.
What would you like to? Yeah, let me say that. Rephrase that. What would you
Yeah,
like to
because,
see?
liking to see and what you actually think you're going to see are two different things. I mean, I want to see more of Brutus and Jod going to Ad-Aden because, again, we didn't really go too far in depth in our review on that side of it. But again, the Brutus character I thought was really interesting. The fact that now because it's basically setting up now you have both groups They're going to Ad-Aden. Jude knows the
Mhm.
way now. And then, of course, KB said, "Hey, I got the coordinates in my head. I know where we have to go." So this opens the door for now both sets of characters,
Mhm.
Jude
To
and his
converge.
crew, and then yeah, they can now converge on Ad-Aden, which I think is what's going to probably happen in the next episode. But I want to see a little bit more of that Jude and Brutus storyline, and then of course I want to see the kids going there too. I mean, I guess basically, if I had to sum it up, I want to see the convergence now of the characters going to Ad-Aden. I think now maybe it might be time because you do only have 2 episodes left. That I think now, as fun as these adventures have been, we probably need to see what's going on in Ad-Aden. We need to see these characters, both sets, reach Ad-Aden, and then we also need to pretty much get a resolution of that whole storyline and find out a little bit more of, the jewels of the old republic, and they were like a mint and all that. I mean, I guess that plays into what's basically going on because again, why
Mhm.
is everybody an analyst? I mean, there were a lot of mysteries that were introduced in the very first episode of this show that they just sort of, you know, glossed over. And you and I had speculated, like, okay, is this something that they're going to deal with in this season? Or is it basically getting these kids home, having a little bit of action on the planet, and then maybe next season is where you really get into the further mysteries? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say I would like to see, of course, them converge on that ad, and I would love to find out who Jod really is. I think
Yeah,
we're going to
that's
find
that
that
was
out through
that was my
Brutus.
third one. That was my third one, is to find out who is Jod really. You know,
Yeah, we need to
which
kind
of
of
his
solve that
names is
mystery.
real? I mean, I'm sure they all are in a
Exactly.
way, but like, yeah, who is this guy? Does he have what's his deal with the Jedi thing? Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
yeah. So that whole force thing, I need to know that. Um, and then, um, yeah, like where do we go from here on at like once we reach at Aden? Like, okay, like there has to be something that's probably going to spawn a season 2. So what is that thing going to be? I think that's going to be trying to figure out, like, all right, because we got the supervisor. I got to figure out who that is. Like I feel like that's a someone we know. I feel like that's going to be like end up being somebody that either we might know from some other medium,
I know it's like
and
Palpatine.
or like uh Grand Moff Tarkin. I mean, not Tarkin, um, Gideon or something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's the other
You
thing
know.
too, right? Is that this is taking place like kind of in that Mandalorian esque timeline. I always
Hmm.
forget like exactly when it takes place, but yeah, there are a lot, especially when you consider the fact that the people of Ad-Aden don't even know there was ever a galactic war.
You're
They
right.
still think that Alderaan's still there. They think, I mean, they have no concept that there was ever an empire, rebellion, none of that. I mean, even when they were referencing, it was nice to see the X-Wings make another appearance in this episode too.
Hmm.
And they're like, well, I think they're the good guys, right? I mean, they have no concept of any of that. And obviously, that's a planet wide thing. Now, of course, I'm sure the leaders of Ad-Aden probably are very aware of this stuff and are just keeping it from the citizens. It's going to be
Hmm.
really interesting to see how because it's not just how they resolve some of the storylines that we've had, but it's also revealing to us how much of this stuff is known. Like what's really going on in that ad, and is it like the hierarchy is keeping it from the citizens? Does no one know about any of this stuff? I mean, there's a lot of different things that a lot of different directions they can go.
Yeah, because no one's allowed to leave. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like the supervisor, like there's a lot of the inner workings of the government of Ad Aden needs to be fleshed out.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of that's going to, like you said, inform us on what's going to happen in season 2. Now, I'm sure after we see in when we're reviewing episode 7, which again drops tomorrow, we'll be reviewing it, later this weekend. That's probably going to be where when you start to get into the whole, hey, what would you like to see in the next episode? Because that's going to be the season finale. That's when I think we're going to really start to hone in on precisely what it is that we would like to see as far as a conclusion goes. Because right now it's still speculative. I mean, granted, we only have 2 more episodes left, but next episode I think is going to really be a pivotal moment. And again, I honestly hope that we see both groups converging on the planet. I think that that's something that absolutely needs to happen.
I agree.
All right, so rating-wise, what are you going to give it? And, of course, everybody chatting is welcome to give us their thoughts as well.
6.5.
Yeah, I'm going to go 7. Because, again, I mean, I like the character development in this. I really thought that it went a long way and that it went, a little bit further. Because, when I think of a filler episode, I think of stuff like that, the eggs and the frog lady from The Mandalorian, or the droids like in the Clone Wars on the planet where they're just trying to find their way back, and it's like okay, you have this whole other storyline going that is infinitely more interesting, and you're giving us like 3 or 4 episodes, each one dropping each week, so that's almost a month of episodes on just a group of droids trying to find their way back home from a strange planet. I mean, that's when it gets fillerish to me. For me, as long as the story is advancing, but I do understand where you're coming from too, though, because when you're looking at a series that only has 8 episodes, it's like, look, guys, you gotta give us a lot of meat in each one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now David, of course, weighs in, as expected, and says, what are you all expecting the finale to be in a show like this? They're kids, so I'm not looking for galactic CGI battle. But I don't know. Because if you think about it, if you go back to the last couple of episodes, I mean, they got really, really dark and really violent, actually.
Well, the opening of the show was very...
Well, and that's the thing, because there's a lot of, and this is something I meant to bring up too, actually, now that we're talking about this. There was a lot of correlations between the typical pirate stuff that you see that they Star Wars-ized it, which I thought was nice. Like I said, the hourglass, instead of it being sand, it's like plasma. Instead of walking the plank, you're sent out the airlock. They have like these Star Wars variations of the typical pirate themes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, instead of Pirates of the Caribbean, it could have very easily have been, I don't know, Pirates of oh crap, what was the water world? Camino. I mean, they basically have like their own variation of it, but they very much keep the feel. Like you kind of feel like you're watching. I mean, it went from being Goonies in space to being Pirates of the Caribbean in space, or in the Star Wars universe. So, as far as what we expect, I mean, speaking for myself, I'm not 100% sure that just because it's basically geared toward kids that we're not going to see some crazy thing. I mean, the last episode, you basically had the adult holding a knife up to a kid's throat. I mean, I think that the idea of this being kind of a safe show is not necessarily the most accurate thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think for the finale. I mean, there might be some. But see, the thing is that the battles may not be between with the kids. It could be just at Aden, because you do have pirates who are trying to take over at Aden. At Aden may have its own defenses that are set up because they kept talking about, like, hey, any place that they try to leave will get shot down, things like that. So they keep mentioning that. So there's some defenses on AT-AT, and because of what AT-AT is, from what we've heard, it's got to be protected pretty well, especially when you after you saw what happened to Akron. So it could be a battle, and the kids could just be trying to get information to the adults, like, "Hey, no, look, this is who this is. This is who that is. You know, you got to stop them. You have to do the, that type of thing." So they may be in the thick of it, but not actually the ones pulling the triggers, so to speak.
Well, I'll even go a step further than that too, right? So you have two other things you got to look at here. Number one, it could very well be that, you know, I don't think this is going to be another one of those like, Phantom Menace. Oh, so this is pod racing. Oh, let's try going left. I mean, one of the
Oh my
things that
god.
I love is the fact that they don't make these kids silly and stupid and overly kid-like.
Yeah.
It's almost like I'm going to try to imagine what kids want versus how kids actually are. And so you're
Hmm.
right. I mean, they may or may not actually be involved in the battle itself. They might be providing some of the intel on some of these different people that are just popping up out of nowhere. But here's the second thing that I think we should consider because they've hinted towards this, both in the episode that we're reviewing right now and in a couple of episodes. They brought in some X-Wings. They brought in the New Republic is looking for some of these people. Maybe the New Republic comes into play somehow into this
Hmm.
final battle too. So you can't really rule that out either. So whether or not that's the case or whether they're just because again they might be setting something up for season 2 as well, even though like I said we're pretty much like 80% through this show. It's still difficult to really tell what part of this is going to be included in season 1 versus what they might carry over into season 2. And the New Republic's role in this is definitely, I think, included in that. I mean, unless you have some ideas of what you think the New Republic might be doing.
No, I mean that would make sense. And like I
Yeah,
said, especially with the supervisor, like we don't know who that is, or
right. Or
so
how much do they know?
I
Because
think
it's like you brought up, right? It's like, does the government that's controlling and do they really know the truth about everything and they're keeping it from the citizens? Or are they in the dark too?
right.
Which would actually be somewhat interesting because they're this isolated planet and like nobody knows anything. And all of a sudden you got like all these crazy you got like pirates, you got, maybe the New Republic or whatever. All of a sudden all these people are converging on the planet. You have to wonder like, okay, that's going to be a little bit of a shock for them.
I think they do. I think they know. I think they just are trying to keep it from the public because they want the public to just focus on whatever it is that they got them doing. But
Right. Why are they all
I think
data
they know.
analysts? Exactly. And that's
Exactly.
I agree too. Here's what I think. If I'm going to make a prediction, we'll see. We got 2 episodes before it pans out. Or maybe we won't get the answer to season 2, but at least we'll have a hint. I think that the government actually knows that this thing was the mint of the old republic. I think that they got some sort of clandestine operation going and maybe the kids inadvertently are upsetting this because don't forget you also have the parent storyline, right? Where in the last episode we had Wim's father who was like hiding stuff because he was finding things out, and of course the droid was starting to question him, and it seemed like it was going beyond just the normal thing. Like there's things being covered up that I think that the powers that be don't want the citizens to necessarily find out. And so yeah, I think that that's where what you're saying and what we're both more or less saying is an umbrella to this that, there's definitely more going on. The government on AT-AT probably knows about it. It's probably involved in it. And maybe this whole, hey, Jude and his pirate friends and then, the kids and all that converging on this and blowing this wide open exposes this to everybody. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I would agree. It's
Yeah,
gonna be
well,
interesting.
It is, and,
We
don't
got
forget.
tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow everybody can, watch it. Of course, we won't be reviewing it for a little bit. Again, here we are Monday. We didn't make it yesterday, but, it's fine. It's all good. You guys know the drill. If you hit the notification, first of all, hit the like button, because I know a lot of you guys are watching this. If you're still watching this, you obviously like it, unless you like watching train wrecks. So if you're watching this still, go ahead and hit the like button. You might as well. You're watching this. Hit the thing. It helps us. The other thing is, of course, if you subscribe to the channel, and if you do subscribe, especially the way our schedule has been for our live streams, it would really be beneficial if you hit that notification bell, because then you'll be notified whenever we go live. You won't ever have to worry about missing it. If, on the other hand, you're like the other 90% of our subscribers who watch this after the fact, well, then it doesn't matter when we actually go live. But know that the next time that we are live, which will probably be Sunday, I'm putting it out there now. It'll probably be Sunday. Then, yeah, we're going to be reviewing episode 7 of Skeleton Crew. We're, of course, now just 2 short episodes away from the finale of this thing. It'll be another one. Probably the next thing, and you sent this to me earlier, and I really like the idea. I actually read through the article, and I'm like, you know what? I like the idea of covering this. I forgot, maybe it was Star Wars. Was it actually Star Wars official site, or was it Newsnet?
I think it was Newsnet.
Yeah, that did everything that's coming up in 2025 or whatever. It's always good at the beginning of the year to do the shows like that. So I think definitely our next non-Skeleton Crew episode, which I'm hoping is a week from tonight, because if we're able to, I would love to get back to doing the 2 a week again. If we cover Skeleton Crew episode 7 next Monday, we can actually put together a little thing for you guys and discuss a lot of the things that's coming up, including your favorite Visions, Season 3. I read through that. I was like, oh, you'll probably be so happy. It's like if that thing gets canceled like The Acolyte or something. But, hey, Season 2 was way better than 1. If Season 3 is actually if its quality is as much improved as Season 2 was towards Season 1, then, it'll be cool. Because it really wasn't a pain to do the last one we did. Because I remember at first, after Season 1, we're like, and Season 2 was announced, we're like, oh, man, we got to do it. We told everybody we would do it. And actually, Ronaldo was to blame, because we weren't even going to review Visions in the first place, but he wanted us to do it. So, because of him, we're stuck reviewing all these now. So, hopefully, you guys, are on board for that one. Discuss some of the things that maybe you're looking most forward to. I might even put a poll up not too long before we do the show to see what kinds of things you guys are looking forward to this year. Of course, we want to wish everybody, this is the first episode of 2025, so we want to say Happy New Year to everybody. I should have done that at the beginning, but hey, if you stuck with us to the end, Happy New Year to you. Not to the people that tuned out like 30 seconds later. I don't care what kind of New Year they have. Happy New Year to the people that are actually watching us right now. That's sort of where I'm at. So until next week, enjoy your week. Watch episode 7. Get all caught up. Watch as many reviews as you want, and then be back next Sunday. It'd be Sunday when we review episode 7 ourselves, and we can all talk about it as a group. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.